Story 1. I was disowned, but I deserved it. I was an addict and a mess for a long time. My mom couldn't keep bailing me out of trouble and watch me self-destruct anymore. I wasn't living at home. She came to see me one last time and tell me she was done, not to contact her, that she would no longer have anything to do with me. She was in pieces. I can't imagine how hard it must have been for her. But it was the best thing she ever did for me. Once she cut me off, my rock bottom came hard and fast. After a little while of living on the streets and my addiction consuming me, I made my way to a detox center, got a few days clean under my belt, and never looked back. That was almost 15 years ago. After I was clean for a little while, I contacted my mom, and little by little, we built a relationship again, and now we're really close. I am forever grateful to my mom for letting me fall and letting me back into her life. This has to be the most heartwarming thing I've ever read. To be able to look at things rationally and not hate your mother, but rather appreciate what she did to you while you were in a dire spot. This is something not everyone can do. I don't know you, but I'm glad you were able to get back into your mother's life, and I'm sure she's also happy that you got back on your feet. Wish you all the best. Story 2. My parents disowned my oldest sister. I'm the youngest of 3 girls. My oldest sister had a horrible relationship with my father, blames me for getting in the way of their relationship. She had her first baby, to spite him, when she was 16 years old. My father refused to give her money because she met a deadbeat child and got pregnant again and again and again. She constantly puts herself and deadbeat before kids. Dad would send money to the girls for Christmas and birthdays and never heard a thing. He finally gave up. She's 30, has 6 daughters, and lives in a mobile home in North Carolina. We hadn't seen or heard from my sister until June of this year. My oldest niece contacted me asking to come to Florida, where I live, for the summer to get her and her sisters out of the trailer. I agree, contact my sister, and she agrees. I set up plane tickets and organized the rooms they'll stay in. When they got here, they were completely disheveled. Clothes visibly dirty, smelled foul, so covered in lice that my white towels stained gray from removing them. My niece informed me that they had been without water and electricity for 6 months. They live in a 2-bedroom mobile home. There are holes in the roof, bugs and rats everywhere. As a family, we decide the girls aren't going back to North Carolina. We tell my sister to come to my parents' house in Florida to get her life together and get her back on her feet. She refused because Deadbeat is not invited. Ironically, she found out that Deadbeat is cheating on her. She confronts him and he kicks her out of the whole trailer. Deadbeat said, "I would rather be homeless than live with you." Sister now works for the dollar store and doesn't pull her weight with the kids. At least the girls are safe now. My parents had disowned my oldest sister when she moved to North Carolina with a deadbeat for 6 years until my niece reached out to me through Facebook. I had never even met my 2 youngest nieces until this event. I regret turning my back on my sister. I really hate her and what she put her babies through. But if we stayed in her life for those 6 years, we maybe could have prevented this. Story 3. My siblings and I have stopped interacting with my oldest brother. We found out that years earlier he had at least 2 boys. He was an adult at the time. He showed no remorse and turned the story around to say that those boys were at fault. It was so disgusting to watch someone you grew up with treat people so poorly and show such a blatant disregard for others. The good news is that the remaining 4 siblings have become closer and we now are able to appreciate the good we see in each other. It's true when they say that if you could pick your family, it would look much different than it is. Story 4. Not me, but my great-grandma. This story is really sad, but also interesting, so I thought I'd share it. She was a young Creole teenager. French Creole was her first language, and she was a quarter to half black like me, with tan skin and loose brown curls. She was born in Florida, but when things started getting worse for black people in Florida, her family relocated to Texas. For those who don't know, Creole people tend to play heavily into colorism. Although they are definitely mixed race, they prioritize light-skinned people. The looser your curl, the lighter your skin. The more white you look, the better. Her parents had high expectations for her to marry a wealthy, light-skinned man who would take care of her. Instead, she met my great-grandfather, a poor, dark-skinned man jumping from job to job, working for farmers and trying to make a living. The two of them fell in love. They were just teenagers. Her parents threatened to disown her if she continued seeing him, and like a rebellious teenager, she refused. They wanted her to do better. She wanted to be in love. They might have broken up eventually if she didn't get pregnant, but she did, and that was the end of it. Her parents basically said, "You've ruined your life," and disowned her right there. The whole family disowned her. No one would speak to her. Aunts, uncles, cousins, not a single person stood up for her. So she had no choice. The two of them moved to California so he could get a job picking oranges. He built a house. They had their first daughter. She was 16. She never saw her family again. Story 5. My parents disowned my older sister. She always struggled growing up more than us. She became a teen mom with a bad older dude, partied a lot, etc. But my parents helped her a lot. They do okay for themselves, but had a no co-signing rule for all 6 of my siblings and I. Still, they co-signed for her house so she could get a head start. She didn't pay the mortgage for almost 3 years before my mom got served in front of all of the other nurses at her work. My parents worked tirelessly to try to work out deals where my sister and her family kept the house and got some leniency, but to no avail, because my sister never showed up for court dates. During this time, she paid $12,000 for IVF and got pregnant with her 5th kid. When my mom demanded some of the money back, she accused my dad and my brother of beating her sons when my parents took them to Disney World. He didn't, and said she'd file a police report if he asked for money again. They kept asking because it wasn't true. She awkwardly joined us for Christmas and punched my brother in the face during the meal for humiliating her oldest son by asking him if he wanted to work at my brother's company for good pay. Her oldest son is in and out of jail, and my brother was trying to help him after his release. But her son said he didn't want a job and got mad. She then called the cops and told them the same brother had illegal guns in his truck, and they came on Christmas night and searched his truck. No guns found. Needless to say, she is not welcome anywhere near any of us, and my mom still cries about it, but refuses to talk to her again. Story 6. My mother and her sister were both adopted into a great family. Recently, my grandfather fell ill, and we were told to prepare to say goodbye. So the family gathered. My grandmother has had a hard time with her memory since she had a brain hemorrhage, but she welcomed my aunt into her home during this tough time. Whilst my grandfather was in his final week, Wendy, my aunt, took my grandmother's ATM card and proceeded to spend well over $1,000 on herself and get herself a motel room. She also attempted to steal their car. When my uncles found out, she basically disappeared into the wind. After, my grandfather passed and his funeral was all sorted. My grandmother went to an attorney to write Wendy out of any inheritance she would ever get from their estate when she passed. She didn't press any formal charges because the whole process would have been lengthy and more painful for her. She did not need the extra stress. I'm pretty sure one of my uncles also threatened Wendy to make sure she stayed away from my grandmother from now on too. Story 7. My parents didn't disown me. It was just a weird mistake. My mother never wanted a child. She bailed after a few months. My father was a single parent and ended up in prison, life without parole, when I was 14. I finally met my mother. She was a police detective by the time I moved in with her. She threw me out after 2 months. I am 30 now, and life is typically a little weird around the holidays, but I always get a good laugh when I tell people that my father is in prison for life and my mother is a cop, but then they get super awkward when I tell them that no, it's not a joke. It took a long time for me to come to terms with it, but I know now that none of it was my fault. Story 8. My father said my mother's issue was that she had too many children and it gave her some kind of brain fever, much like a dog that loses its mind after having too many puppies. My mother said my father felt trapped with me. He was planning to leave when it was just my 2 older brothers, and then my mother got pregnant with me and he felt obligated to stay. Now that I'm an adult with 2 kids myself, I think I realized that both of my parents are just extremely mentally ill and incapable of loving anyone, including themselves. Story 9. My ex-wife disowned my son. We both married young when I was in the military. High school sweethearts. She became pregnant 6 months into our marriage. I don't think she connected with him at all after he was born. The most she did with him was Instagram photo shoots where she painted herself as #1 mommy. When he turned 3, I left the military. A year after that, she ran for the hills. I remember it like it was yesterday. I sat down with her at a local restaurant to talk divorce plans. We split all of our financials and material items down the middle. We finally got custody for my kiddo, something I dreaded discussing because fathers never gain custody in my area. And she tells me I want absolutely no responsibility. I was taken back and I asked if she was sure. She was. That one sentence hurt me more than anything else that happened during that time. My biological father wanted nothing to do with me, and now I was seeing it happen with my own child, but with his mother. I received full custody, and she married within a year afterwards. She had another child too. Her parents try their best to be a part of his life, but she still does her best to avoid him. He's 7 now and used to it, but I know it weighs heavily on him. It sucks, but it's life, I guess. Story 10. Since it seems to have widened a bit, a family torn apart, based on an aunt and her niece. Aunt starts showing signs of dementia at a relatively young age and is moved into an assisted living home. Niece, who bounces around jobs, gets hired to go visit her about once a week, take her out to the mall or a walk in the park, whatever. Paid handsomely. We get an alert that aunt has a check bounce from her account that should have about $5,000 in it. Niece has drained the account. Proven beyond a doubt, with receipts. Niece would take aunt to aunt's bank machine every Friday and withdraw $200, then fill her car with gas, aunt can't drive, and charge us hours when she clearly didn't spend hours with aunt. Charged us, claiming she took aunt to appointments. There was no appointment. We can actually call the doctor, FYI. The family rift? For some bizarre reason, my niece's family took her side. Of course they took her side. I'll bet in their minds the niece earned it. Niece was doing the unpleasant and sometimes emotionally and mentally draining work of visiting and entertaining a family member suffering from dementia. It saved them from having to set aside time to do it themselves. Everybody wins, right? Ugh. Story 11. Theft, repetitively trying to destroy his younger brother, becoming a danger to myself and others, mental health issues that he refuses to deal with any longer or take his meds for anymore. Just plain off-the-chain behavior that was too much for all of us. I wouldn't call it disowning, as much as putting down boundaries and setting up fences to protect people who don't deserve his treatment. He also tends to be very manipulative and leans towards narcissistic behavior, and that he will habitually lie about you to others and try to play the victim. This can be very damaging to relationships with people that don't understand what's going on. So I'd rather just not bring myself into the equation anymore, because it's too costly and it's not worth it. He lacks empathy and doesn't know how to stop himself from his harmful behavior due to a developmental disability, although he will also admit that he knows what he's doing and he knows that he is manipulative and playing games at times. When he was younger and was under the rules of being a minor, then he had all the help in the world, and it was easier to deal with. Story 12. I wouldn't say I've disowned or stopped loving my son, but it's really tough to find love for him. He's almost 14 next month, and he's currently out of our home at a treatment facility. He's averaged 2 arrests a year for the last 2 years, and he's my wife several times, our daughters several times, and the neighborhood kids several times. He ran away from school, ran away from home, and tried to push me off the roof of our house, after threatening to jump off and hurt himself. We have become that family in our town, where the police are called to our home on a semi-regular basis. He's been getting more violent as he gets older, not to mention bigger and stronger, and I honestly don't see an end in sight. The key fact I'm leaving out is that he's been diagnosed as high-functioning autistic and is also bipolar. That's like putting walls around a tornado and expecting it to stay inside the walls. A lot of what has occurred he has little control over because of the way his mind is, where he's constantly at war with himself, structure versus chaos. and my wife and I have tried desperately to give him the best life we can while keeping ourselves and our daughters safe. But I'm tired. It's been 8.5 years we've been going through this with him, and I've been ready to throw in the towel on him for a while. My wife refuses to let him go, so we wake up every morning trying to give him the best life for him and our girls. Story 13. Do adopted kids count? We adopted a 3-year-old from foster care. Cutest, sweetest kid. He had a few issues, but we mostly figured it was because of his history. The issues escalated quickly. When he was 7, he hit our dog with a golf club. We had to keep him away from our dog and our cat. The cat disappeared. We assumed she got out and ran away. Found out years later that he and threw it in the woods. The last straw was when he burned our home down. We sent him to a residential treatment center where he stayed for 2 years. During that time, he assaulted a roommate and became extremely violent. The insurance company told us that they wouldn't pay anymore, and we'd either have to pay for him out of pocket, $40K a month, or bring him home. We have younger children, and it wouldn't be safe. We ended up telling the state we wouldn't bring him home. So now we have a verified report against us because we wouldn't bring him back, even though the therapists agreed with our decision. I don't love him. I wish the best for him, but I don't feel anything toward him. Story 14. I asked my biological father at 28 why he never tried to see me after he and my mom got a divorce. He said he never wanted to try for any custody arrangement because that meant he would have to pay child support. So the fear of child support led him to stop talking to his 9-year-old. He's currently doing the same thing to my 2 younger half-sisters. Some people just really shouldn't be parents. Story 15. As Jehovah's Witnesses, my parents disowned my siblings and I several times since I was in my late teens. One of the JW rules is that you do not associate with others who know the truth, but refuse to follow it, including family, and parents are encouraged to disown any children who have left the religion. The first time was when I was 19. It upset me. I was heartbroken, and eventually they changed their minds only to do it again a couple of years later, and so on until I stopped caring and no longer attempted to be a part of their lives at all. Story 16. Not the parent, but my mom ceased all contact with my much older half-brother from a different dad. He was a violent, angry addict, would steal from and beat up my grandparents and my mom. She finally had enough. He died this year, and it's the first time my mom had seen him since she cut him off 15-ish years ago. I now have my own kids, and I've always supported my mom's decision. That said, I feel so sorry for her, more so than when I was just her kid. I can't imagine ever reaching that point with my kids, and I'm sure she never did either. Story 17. My mother simply didn't want kids, but never bothered to prevent all 3 of us from having different men. She tried to have my dad put in jail for abuse. Meanwhile, he was working 2 jobs to support us and would come home to a filthy house and my diaper completely loaded. She put all 3 of us in foster care, and luckily my dad got me, and my other half-sister's dad got her, but the oldest of us spent 18 years of her life in foster care. I last saw my mother when I was 6 because she had seen that my dad was successful and wanted to use him for money. He brought me to a park to meet her, and she blatantly ignored me and instead was all over my dad. He's a smart man, and he realized this, and that is the last time I ever saw her. She never sent one birthday card or ever paid a dime of child support to my dad, because she didn't want kids and couldn't take any steps to prevent it all 3 times. Congrats, Mom! You are the world's biggest piece of shit. Story 18. My biological father divorced my mom and also his 3 kids, basically bouncing out of our lives and making it clear he wanted next to nothing to do with any of us when he left. Many years later, at my older sister's funeral, which she had the gall to attend, I asked him why he did that. He said, I thought it would be easier for everyone. He actually meant it was easier for him to run home to his wealthy family and enjoy a second adolescence while my single mother worked 2 jobs to feed 3 kids under 10 with 0 child support from him.